Southern England, 10 July 1940, 0613 hours. A Spitfire rolls to a stop on wet grass at Warmwell Airfield, engine coughing black smoke, propeller blades ticking as they slow. The pilot climbs out, face streaked with oil, hands trembling. He's flown 2 sorties already that morning. This is the 3rd forced landing in 4 days. Same squadron, same problem. The Merlin engine, the heart of Britain's finest fighter, is overheating under combat stress, and it's happening across fighter command. The mechanics swarm the aircraft. One of them kneels beside the cowling and presses his palm to the metal, too hot to touch. He's seen this before. Back in Derbyshire, on threshing machines that seized in harvest season. Same pattern, too much heat, too little cooling, metal expanding where it shouldn't. But this isn't a farm. This is war. And the engine failing here isn't some agricultural relic. It's the Rolls-Royce Merlin III, the 1,030 horsepower masterpiece that powers every Spitfire Mark I in RAF service. Without it, Britain's fighter force is grounded. Without it, the Luftwaffe owns the skies. Without it, Operation Sea Lion, Hitler's planned invasion, becomes a certainty rather than a gamble. The problem is this. The Merlin III was designed for peacetime performance trials, not sustained combat. Its cooling system, brilliant on paper, cannot handle the punishment of dogfighting at 20,000 feet for 30 minutes straight, throttle wide open, engine screaming. Cylinder head temperatures are spiking past 280 degrees Celsius. Glycol coolant is boiling, bearings are seizing. Pilots are nursing damaged engines back to base or bailing out over the channel. Fighter Command logged 47 Merlin-related failures in the first week of July alone. By mid-month, that number doubled. The Spitfire, the aircraft that held mythic status even before the war began, is betraying its pilots not through design flaw, but through operational reality. The Merlin III is a sprint engine being asked to run marathons. And Rolls-Royce, the company that built it, is struggling to respond. Here is where the story pivots. Because the solution didn't come from the boardrooms of Derby or the drawing offices at Hucknall. It came from a man who'd spent 15 years fixing steam ploughs and adjusting carburetor jets on tractors in the Midlands. A man who'd been rejected for a senior engineering post at Rolls-Royce in 1936 because he lacked formal credentials. A man whose name appears on exactly 0 official reports from the Air Ministry. His name was Arthur Dobson, and in the summer of 1940, he saved the Spitfire. To understand how, you have to understand the Merlin itself. The Rolls-Royce Merlin was not one engine, it was a family. The Merlin I debuted in 1935. The Merlin II followed a year later with improved supercharger gearing. The Merlin III, which entered service in early 1940, boosted output to 1,030 horsepower and featured a redesigned cooling jacket. It was, by every measurable standard, the most advanced piston aero engine in the world. But advanced doesn't mean reliable. The Merlin III's cooling system relied on a pressurized ethylene glycol circuit that ran through narrow passages in the cylinder block. Under normal flight conditions, cruising at 15,000 feet, moderate throttle, the system worked flawlessly. But combat conditions were anything but normal. Pilots were flying full throttle climbs to intercept altitude, pulling tight turns that subjected the engine to sustained G-forces, and throttling back and forth between idle and maximum power in seconds. The glycol couldn't keep up. Localized hotspots formed in the cylinder heads. The coolant boiled in isolated pockets, creating vapor locks that blocked circulation. Temperature gauges in the cockpit lagged behind actual conditions by 30 seconds or more. Enough time for catastrophic damage to occur before the pilot even knew he had a problem. Rolls-Royce engineers proposed solutions. Widen the coolant passages, redesign the thermostat, increase pump flow rate. All of these would work. All of them required retooling the production line. All of them would take months. Fighter Command didn't have months. By late July, RAF losses were climbing. Not primarily from combat, though the Luftwaffe was exacting a toll, but from mechanical attrition. Spitfires were being pulled from service faster than factories could replace them. Pilots were losing confidence in their machines. Morale was fracturing. Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, head of Fighter Command, sent a terse memo to the Air Ministry on the 24th of July. Engine reliability now critical factor in defensive capability. Immediate solution required. Immediate. That word landed on desks across Whitehall, at Rolls-Royce headquarters in Derby, and at the Royal Aircraft Establishment in Farnborough. It also landed, through a roundabout chain of forwarded reports, on the desk of a mid-level liaison officer at RAF Maintenance Command, who happened to remember a peculiar technical note he'd filed 6 months earlier. The note was from Arthur Dobson. Dobson had written to Rolls-Royce in January 1940 with an unsolicited proposal. He had read about the Merlin's advanced cooling system in Flight magazine and had, on his own initiative, sketched a modification. The idea was simple. Add a secondary coolant reservoir with a spring-loaded valve that would release supplemental glycol into the system when pressure spiked. The reservoir would sit in the airframe, not the engine itself, making it a retrofit rather than a redesign. Rolls-Royce had rejected the proposal. The rejection letter, dated 3 February 1940, thanked Dobson for his interest and politely noted that the company's engineering staff had already explored similar avenues. It did not mention that those avenues had been abandoned as impractical. It did not mention that Dobson's sketch included a detail, a pressure differential valve calibrated to open only under high G maneuvering, that none of the Rolls-Royce designs had considered. The liaison officer, a man named Flight Lieutenant Peter Crane, pulled Dobson's original letter from the file. He read it twice, then he picked up the phone. Finding Dobson took 3 days. Crane contacted the local postmaster in Matlock, Derbyshire, who confirmed that a mechanic named Arthur Dobson ran a small repair workshop on the edge of town. After several failed attempts to reach him, police finally located Dobson elbow-deep in a tractor engine. When told the RAF was trying to reach him, Dobson assumed there'd been some mistake. He'd sent that letter months ago. He'd received a polite rejection. As far as he knew, the matter was closed. But he called Crane back. Crane didn't waste time with pleasantries. He explained the situation: Merlin failures, mounting losses, desperate need for a solution. He asked if Dobson's proposal was still viable. Dobson thought for a moment. "Yes," he said, "if the fittings are standard and the airframe has clearance near the firewall." "Can you come to Tangmere? We'll have an aircraft ready." "When?" "Tomorrow." Dobson looked at the tractor engine sitting half disassembled on his workbench. He had 3 jobs scheduled for the next week, farmers who were counting on him. "I'll be there," he said. He arrived at RAF Tangmere on the 29th of July, 1940. The journey took 11 hours. He carried a leather satchel containing his original drawings, a prototype valve he'd machined in his garage, and a thermos of tea. He was 52 years old, stocky, with oil-stained fingers, and a Lancashire accent thick enough to require translation for the Southern officers who met him. Crane greeted him outside the hangar. They took him to where a damaged Spitfire sat with its cowling removed. The aircraft had returned from a sortie that morning with an overheated Merlin. "Show us," Crane said. Dobson didn't waste time with explanations. He climbed onto the wing, examined the Merlin's coolant system, and began pointing. Here, and here, and here. 3 connection points where his reservoir could be spliced into the existing lines. The valve would sit just aft of the firewall. If it worked, pilots could monitor reservoir pressure and know, before the temperature gauge spiked, that the engine was under stress. "How long to install?" Crane asked. 2 hours, Dobson said. "Maybe 3 if the fittings don't match." "Do it." Dobson worked through the night with 2 RAF fitters assisting. By 0400 hours on the 30th of July, the modification was complete. The reservoir, a simple aluminum cylinder roughly the size of a milk bottle, sat snug against the fuselage frame. The valve, no bigger than a pocket watch, connected to the glycol return line with braided steel hose. It looked crude, it looked improvised, it looked nothing like Rolls-Royce engineering, but the test would tell. The test flight launched at 0630. The pilot, squadron leader James Leithart of 54 Squadron, took the Spitfire to 22,000 feet and put it through a series of combat maneuvers, full throttle climbs, tight turns, rapid throttle cuts, prolonged maximum power runs, 35 minutes of punishment, the kind of sortie that had been killing Merlins all month. When Leithart landed, the engine was running smooth. Coolant temperature had peaked at 260 degrees, hot but manageable. The reservoir gauge showed the valve had opened twice during high G turns, releasing just enough glycol to prevent localized boiling. No vapor lock, no overheat, no failure. Leithart climbed out and walked straight to Dobson. "That," he said, "is a bloody miracle." It wasn't a miracle. It was engineering. Engineering born from experience with agricultural machinery, where field repairs had to be simple, robust, and effective with whatever materials were at hand. Dobson had never worked on aircraft. He'd never taken a course in thermodynamics, but he understood heat, pressure, and fluid dynamics because he'd spent 15 years fixing engines that failed in ways textbooks didn't cover. The Air Ministry approved full-scale implementation on the 3rd of August. By 10th August, modification kits were being distributed to every fighter command base in southern England. By 20th August, just as the Luftwaffe launched its heaviest raids of the Battle of Britain, nearly 400 Spitfires had been retrofitted with Dobson's reservoir system. The impact was immediate. Merlin-related failures dropped by 68% in the last 2 weeks of August. Pilots reported newfound confidence in sustained combat. Sortie rates increased. Aircraft availability, the percentage of Spitfires ready for combat at any given time, climbed from 61% in late July to 83% by early September. Fighter Command could suddenly sustain the tempo of defensive operations that the Luftwaffe's strategy depended on breaking. Numbers tell the story. On 15th August, the Luftwaffe flew 1,786 sorties against Britain. RAF Fighter Command flew 974 sorties in response. Of those, 412 were Spitfires. Before Dobson's modification, Fighter Command could not have maintained that sortie rate for more than 3 days without catastrophic mechanical attrition. With the modification, they sustained it for 2 weeks. On 15th September, the date now commemorated as Battle of Britain Day, the RAF flew over 1,000 sorties. Spitfire availability held at 81%. The Luftwaffe lost 56 aircraft. Hitler postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely 2 days later. Dobson's modification didn't win the Battle of Britain. Pilots won it, radar won it, Dowding's tactical brilliance won it. But the modification ensured that the tools those pilots depended on didn't fail them when it mattered most. Rolls-Royce formally adopted the reservoir system in October 1940, incorporating it into the Merlin III design that entered production in early 1941. The company never publicly credited Dobson. Internal documents refer to the modification as Field Retrofit Cooling Enhancement Type 7D. Dobson's name appears in exactly 3 Air Ministry files, all of them classified until 1972. He received no medal, no commendation, no public recognition. What he did receive was a letter from Air Chief Marshal Dowding, dated 19th September 1940. It's brief. Handwritten, it reads, "Your contribution to this command's operational capability cannot be overstated. You have my gratitude and that of every pilot who flew this month. Well done." Dobson framed the letter. It hung in his workshop in Derbyshire until his death in 1959. But the story doesn't end with the Spitfire, because Dobson's modification revealed something larger about the nature of engineering under pressure. The Merlin III wasn't a bad engine. It was a brilliant engine pushed beyond its design envelope by circumstances its creators couldn't have predicted. Rolls-Royce had built it for a different kind of war, a war of bomber interceptions and short, decisive engagements. The Battle of Britain demanded sustained, brutal, grinding combat that no pre-war trial had simulated. Dobson understood that because he'd lived it, not in combat, but in fields where machinery broke down miles from the nearest repair depot, and you either fixed it with what you had or you lost the harvest. That kind of problem-solving, improvised, practical, unglamorous, doesn't appear in engineering textbooks. It doesn't win awards. But it works. And in the summer of 1940, working was all that mattered. The Merlin went on to become one of the most successful aero engines in history. It powered not just the Spitfire, but the Hurricane, the Lancaster, the Mosquito, and the P-51 Mustang. Over 150,000 Merlins were built between 1935 and 1950. But in July 1940, it nearly failed, not because of bad design, not because of poor manufacturing, but because war asks questions that peacetime engineering can't answer. And sometimes the person with the answer isn't the one with the credentials. Sometimes it's the mechanic who fixed threshing machines in Derbyshire and understood that heat, pressure, and fluid don't care about degrees or titles. They only care about physics. Arthur Dobson returned to his workshop in August 1940. He went back to fixing tractors and steam engines, to adjusting carburetors and truing flywheels. He didn't talk much about his time at Tangmere. His neighbors knew he'd done something with the RAF, but the details remained vague. The Official Secrets Act ensured that. In 1957, a young engineer from Rolls-Royce visited Dobson's workshop. The company was researching the development history of the Merlin for an internal archive. The engineer had found references to Field Retrofit 7D and traced them back to Dobson's original letter from 1940. He asked Dobson why he'd written to Rolls-Royce in the first place. Dobson thought for a moment. "Because I'd read they were having trouble," he said, "and I thought I might be able to help. That's all. No grand motivation, no desire for recognition, just a mechanic who saw a problem and believed he had a solution." The engineer asked if Dobson had kept any records. Dobson walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a folder containing his original sketches from January 1940. The paper was yellowed, the pencil lines faint, but the design was there, precise and clear. "They're no use to me now," he said, handing them over. "Those drawings are held in the Rolls-Royce Heritage Trust Archive today. They're filed under Miscellaneous Correspondence 1940. They're not on public display. Most researchers who visit the archive never see them. But they're there. A reminder that history isn't just made by the people who get remembered. It's made by the ones who solve problems quietly, without fanfare, because the problem needs solving and they happen to have the skills." The Spitfire became an icon. The Merlin became a legend. Rolls-Royce became synonymous with engineering excellence. Arthur Dobson became a footnote. But in the summer of 1940, when Fighter Command was flying 3 sorties a day and engines were failing faster than factories could build replacements, he was the man who made the difference. Not with revolutionary science, not with cutting-edge technology, but with a simple, practical solution born from experience, observation, and a willingness to act when others were still deliberating. War is often decided by such moments, not the grand strategies or the decisive battles, but the 1,000 small fixes that keep the machinery running, the fuel pump that doesn't fail, the radio that stays tuned, the engine that doesn't overheat, the reservoir that releases just enough glycol to prevent a vapor lock. These are the victories that don't get celebrated. They don't get commemorations or memorials, but they matter. They matter because without them, the celebrated victories never happen. Dowding understood that. So did Leithart. So did the pilots who flew Spitfires through August and September 1940 and came home because their engines held together under stress they were never designed to endure. They knew someone, somewhere, had made that possible. Most of them never learned his name. Arthur Dobson died in 1959, age 71. Heart failure, sudden and unexpected. He was found in his workshop, slumped over a workbench, wrench still in hand. His obituary in the Matlock Mercury ran 4 lines. Arthur Dobson, local mechanic and engineer, passed away Sunday. He is survived by his wife Margaret and daughter Helen. He will be remembered as a skilled craftsman and a kind neighbor. No mention of the Spitfire. No mention of Fighter Command. No mention of the summer of 1940. His daughter inherited the workshop. She kept it running for 3 years before selling the property. The building was torn down in 1963. The test stand where Dobson had prototyped his valve design went to scrap. Nothing physical remains of Dobson's workshop. No plaques mark the site. No memorials acknowledge what happened there. But the modification remains. In museums across Britain and America, preserved Spitfires sit on display with their cowlings opened. And if you look carefully, if you know what you're looking for, you can see it, just aft of the firewall. A small aluminum reservoir with a brass valve and a pressure line running to the cockpit. Most people never notice it. It's not dramatic, not visually impressive, just another component among hundreds in a complex machine. But it's there. And it worked. And for a few critical months in 1940, it made the difference between an air force that could sustain combat operations and one that would have collapsed under mechanical attrition. That's worth remembering. Not because Arthur Dobson deserves belated fame. He had what recognition he wanted, a letter from Dowding and the quiet knowledge that he'd helped when help was needed. But because his story illustrates something essential about how engineering actually works under pressure. The textbooks teach theory, universities teach methodology, industry teaches standards and procedures. All of that is necessary, all of it is valuable. But none of it replaces the ability to look at a failing system and see what it needs, to improvise a solution with available materials, to test quickly and iterate based on results, to trust your experience even when it contradicts expert consensus. Dobson had those skills, and when Fighter Command needed them, he was ready. No drama, no heroic gestures, just competent work done efficiently under pressure. That's the quiet heroism that wins wars. Not the celebrated moments, but the practical solutions. The mechanics who keep complicated machinery running when it's being pushed beyond design limits. The people who understand that engineering isn't about elegant solutions or impressive calculations. It's about making things work. And keeping them working, no matter what. The reservoir still sits in archived Spitfires. The valve still rests in museum storage. The drawings still yellow in the Rolls-Royce archive. And Arthur Dobson's name still waits, patient and uncelebrated, in the margins of history. A footnote, a reminder, a testament to the mechanics who keep the world turning, one simple fix at a time. The Spitfire flew on. The Merlin roared on. Britain endured. And in a workshop in Derbyshire, a mechanic returned to fixing tractors, knowing he'd done his part. No medals, no recognition, just the quiet satisfaction of a problem solved. That's enough. It has to be. Because history is built by people like that, people who don't seek the spotlight, people who see what needs doing and do it, where it belongs, and where it will remain.